This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Nam.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Jamal, we have breaking news. The Assad regime in Syria has fallen. Damascus has fallen. Syria is in the midst of a major upheaval right now. The 50-year reign of the Assad regime has come to an end. We have breaking news from Damascus and throughout Syria right now, where Hayat al-Tahrir and Sham, the major resistance movement, has declared that they have gotten rid of Bashar al-Assad, have toppled the government. And we have a report from the Russian government basically saying that Bashar al-Assad has resigned. He's no longer in Syria, and we have no idea about his whereabouts. Jamal, this is breaking news. We don't have all the details. We're going to be covering this briefly today. It's unclear what the long-term consequences will be of this, but the short-term consequences are that it's going to bring significant instability to the region. We're also going to talk about a former Israeli minister basically saying, this is a former Israeli minister, Jamal, basically saying that the Israeli army is carrying out war crimes in Gaza. So we have more evidence within the Israeli establishment, if you will, agreeing with the world community that Israel is committing war crimes. And one of the other stories we're going to cover briefly today, if we have time, Jamal, is it looks like Genocide Joe is continuing with his bizarre comments that no one is above the law, except, I guess, for his son and for Benjamin Netanyahu. So if we have time, Jamal, we'll cover all of those stories. But before we get to that, we're going to watch an interview with human rights attorney Stanley Cohen, who's going to discuss yet another report, this time from Amnesty International, their newly released 296-page report entitled, "You Feel Like You Are Subhuman, Israel's Genocide Against Palestinians in Gaza," another damning report condemning Israel for their genocide. It's a really great interview, Jamal.
That's right. This is a big news. Of course, Amnesty International, yet another report saying that Israel is committing genocide. Amnesty International also said that Israel was an apartheid state. But unfortunately, nothing is happening on the international community. Nevertheless, I think this report is very important. Let's watch and listen to Stanley Cohen. He's a human rights attorney and an activist. In a damning new report it issued on December 5th, Amnesty International states it has found sufficient basis to conclude that Israel has committed and is continuing to commit genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. In a 296-page, extensively researched report entitled, "You Feel Like You Are Subhuman, Israel's Genocide Against Palestinians in Gaza," Amnesty International documents how, following the Hamas-led attacks in southern Israel on October 7, 2023, Israel has continuously unleashed hell and destruction on Palestinians in Gaza with total impunity. It has caused unprecedented destruction, which experts say occurred at a level and speed not seen in any other conflict in the 21st century, leveling entire cities and destroying critical infrastructure, agricultural land, and cultural and religious sites. It thereby rendered large swaths of Gaza uninhabitable. In addition to Amnesty International, other experts and organizations stating there is ample evidence of Israel genocide are UN Special Rapporteur on the Occupied Palestinian Territories Francesca Albanese, the Center for Constitutional Rights in the United States, Palestinian Civil Society, and the International Court of Justice, who determined almost a year ago that Israel was committing a plausible genocide in Gaza. Since then, the ICC has also issued arrest warrants for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for war crimes. Unsurprisingly, Israel and the United States and a few other Western powers gave a rote refusal of Amnesty's report. Joining us again on Arab Talk this week is human rights attorney and activist Stanley Cohen to talk about the significance and substance of Amnesty International's report and how Israel and its cronies can find no support in the Genocide Convention for denying it. Welcome back to Arab Talk, Stanley.
Thank you for the invitation. I wish that this continued discussion was not necessary. It's essential. We were speaking a few moments ago. I have been fighting the state, not just the state small s, the big S, for more than half a century now in a variety of ways as an organizer, a social worker, a lawyer. Not before in my lifetime can I recall such a glaring example of where the global north in particular, along with some of its proxies in the global south, have not only been engaged in such complete, total public genocide, but basically saying to the rest of the world, screw you, we don't care. We admit it. Of course, Israel has its puppets. It has its propagandists. It has its classic line: "They hate us because we're Jews," and it's ISIS, and it's this, and it's that. But at day's end, when you look, and not too deeply, at behind what Netanyahu is saying, what Israel is saying, what AIPAC is saying, what the ADL is saying, what the Zionist unions across the globe, what Sajbad is now saying in South Africa, is we don't care. We are very public, they are saying, in our decision that we had decided to destroy, not just in whole and part, but in whole, all of Palestinians in Palestine, and to render life unbearable for those in the diaspora community. Israel has violated every single fundamental tenet of the Genocide Conventions of 1948. It has violated every single fundamental tenet of the international laws coming out of the U.S. Civil War 150 years ago, where the Red Cross was responsible for enabling international law that deals with war crimes, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and a host of other crimes. Israel has proudly embraced every breach of every international law, along with the embrace and the support of the global north, and particularly the United States. The report of Amnesty International, the findings of ICJ, the United Nations, both of which have done nothing to bring about enforcement of it, the arrest warrants issued by the ICC, and states all over the world finally waking up and saying guilty as charged, but yet it continues. Every morning I wake up, I get calls still in the middle of the night of another camp that's been burned, another hospital that's been destroyed, another safety net that's been leveled, of children buried under their parents, while the world is largely silent, at least when it comes to international law. In my lifetime, and the Amnesty International report is a great report. I've read it in detail. It is what we call in the law, the court can take judicial notice. It is so established, so proven, so well shown. There is absolutely no defense for Israel against the charges of genocide. There is no defense of complicity against the United States, against France, against the UK, against Germany, against Canada. No matter how much they may say there must be a ceasefire, no matter how much they may say October 7th, October 7th, October 7th, the reality of it is what Israel is doing is in every respect equal to what the Nazis were put on trial for at the Nuremberg tribunals 80 years ago. It's complicity with the West, with the war crimes by Israel, the genocide by Israel, the ethnic cleansing by Israel, and the silence or exact complicit by most of the world cannot be denied, guilty as charged.
So Amnesty International's report demonstrates Israel perpetration of 3 of the 5 prohibited acts constituting genocide as defined by the Genocide Convention. Can you summarize these?
Well, yeah, I disagree with Amnesty International in one point. I don't think they're 3 of 5. I think every linchpin of the Geneva Convention has been violated and is being violated by Israel. You know, the law goes to great pains over technicalities. The law goes to great pains with judges and jurists and prosecutors saying we are bound by the literal application of the law. But the reality of it is words are just feel good or feel bad at times. You have to look at the overall purpose, the overall intent. Ultimately, the Convention Against Genocide deals with one fundamental issue, and that is, by design, the intention to destroy in whole or part an entire people. It then goes on to list a number of ways by which it can be done, whether it's the targeting of civilians, whether it's starvation, whether it is permitting the spread of mass disease, whether it is mass displacement, whether it is the destruction of infrastructure, whether it is the slaughter of doctors and essential medical staff, whether it's denying food and medicine to enter. All of these are what are known as overt acts. And what you do in deciding whether the Genocide Convention has been violated is you look at the statutory intent. The statutory intent is clear. It is intended to protect and to prosecute those who violate the core premise. That is, you cannot single out a group on the basis of their faith, on the basis of their heritage, on the basis of their landed position, to remove them in whole or part, to destroy them in whole or part. And here, as I said, you can remove the part because this is in whole. So yes, when the Amnesty International report talks about starvation, and it talks about targeting civilians, and talks about displacement, yes, those are all fundamental tenets, but there are dozens of overt acts that either implicitly or certainly explicitly are designated by the convention. Not once, in not one occasion, is it a stretch to attach it around the arms of Israel. In every shape and form, Israel is committing genocide. Now, I have been accusing Israel of genocide for decades. And for decades, I've taken the position that in Gaza, turning it into an open-air prison camp, the embargo on food, the targeted destruction of infrastructure, of schools, of hospitals, of support staff, constitutes genocide, and it has and it does. And in the past, Israel has killed and wounded and crippled hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza. And now we see the West Bank becoming more like Gaza and Israel's drive for Gaza to become more like the West Bank. But at no time has it been so palpable. It's as if Israel just said, we don't care. Mm-hmm. We're going to do what we want to do, world. We'll use the same excuses, the same talisman, the same chant. So to get back to your original question, there is no defense. Every single core prohibition of the genocide statutes of 1948 of the convention and all of its interpretations since find Israel guilty through dozens, hundreds of overt acts. Every single day, Israel commits a new violation of the Genocide Convention of 1948.
So Israel responded, and that's that quote unquote, the deplorable and fanatical organization Amnesty International has once again produced a fabricated report that is entirely false and based on lies. And the United States called the allegations unfounded. How is that? How is it that both of these powers are never required to elaborate or defend their comments?
The earth is flat. The earth is flat. The earth is flat. If you say it long enough, you believe it yourself. Ultimately, Israel and the United States, and the necessity to take the position you're lying. The whole world is witness. The whole world is witness. This is not just investigators for Amnesty International. This is Israelis themselves admitting, except for the quote-unquote Amnesty International representatives from Israel, who are distancing themselves from this. Israel and the United States has, beginning in 1945, when the United States dropped not one, but two atom bombs and exterminated hundreds of thousands of civilians. Right through this morning, the United States does what it wishes to do, and then when anyone points an accusatory finger, says, liar, you hate us. You hate us because we stand for democracy and principle, and you do not. Israel is very much a creation of the United States, the support by Truman in 1948, and learned very quickly as a proxy for the United States. You simply have to deny, and become the accuser. This is Epstein blaming 13-year-old children from having the indecency to come visit him on his island. The ultimate question is, when does the world say enough is enough? And people say, well, what can the world do? The world can do a lot. The world can unilaterally break agreements with the United States. The world can shut down any arrangements it has with the United States and with Israel. The world can walk away from military agreements, economic agreements. The world can turn around and deny access to U.S. citizens to entry to its borders. The same for Israel. The world can make it impossible for the Bidens and the Harrises and the Trumps and the Netanyahus to continue. But the world to date has not. And what I think it really requires the world to do, let me just finish, is to re-examine what have we done or not done with regard to international law. If ever there has been an abundant, overwhelming evidence of a failure of the extant justice under international law, it is now.
Well, I was going to say, supporting your argument, Dr. Agnes Callamard, Secretary General at Amnesty International, states that governments must stop pretending they are powerless to end this genocide, which was enabled by decades of impunity of Israel's violations of international law. States need to move beyond mere expressions of regret or dismay and take strong and sustained international action, however uncomfortable a finding of genocide may be for some of Israel's allies. I mean, will this report help in realizing this, or it's just going to be another report added to the ever-expanding file of Israel's war crimes, and it just keep mounting up and nothing happens?
Well, the cynic in me says that all of these reports, all these findings, in 50 or 100 years, the world will look back and say, I didn't know. Or how could we have allowed this to happen? It reminds me of our position on North American and South American and Latin American indigenous communities that were subject to mass genocide by European colonial projects hundreds of years ago, where tens of millions of North American, South American, Latin American, Central American indigenous communities were destroyed, were slaughtered, were murdered. And today the world says, how could we have allowed this to happen? Well, in those days, who knew? There's no denial now. So I think the cynic in me says there will come a time and there will come a place where the world will look back and they're not going to be able to say who knew. All we're going to hear about is October 7th, October 7th, October 7th, as if Palestinians haven't been forced to live with 28,000 days of October 7th and the world has been silent. The world must take a stand here and now. It has the capacity to do it. Those countries that have publicly said Israel must stop and the United States must stop and have done no further, it's like saying bad boy, bad boy, bad boy. You can take a position. You can simply say tomorrow, no American citizen can travel to our country, can enter our borders. No American corporation can do business with any of our states. No American boat can come or airplane can land in our territory. It's a sacrifice. Indeed, it is. But if enough countries got together and took an affirmative action and said, you can't do this, it will force their hand. And yes, it will be painful for those countries who take such a brave stance. But how much less painful than millions of Palestinians and now Lebanese slaughtered, displaced, destroyed, left homeless, tens of thousands of children left orphans, disease spreading. This is on the world, and the world community can act. And to simply say there must be a ceasefire, please stop, be decent, belies the reality of a history of Israel and a history of the United States that not only says we support international law, but at the same time denies its application to anything and everything it's ever done.
The International Criminal Court recently issued arrest warrants for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for war crimes and crimes against humanity. France, the UK, and Germany have contorted the law to give immunity to Israel. Of course, while the United States has welcomed Yoav Gallant in New York just recently, other countries have sworn to arrest both Netanyahu and Gallant within their border. Is international law crumbling under the Israel stress test?
Oh, I think it's been fairly clear. I mean, I've been pushing for the ICC to issue arrest warrants for a long time. In fact, for 10 years or more. But I don't expect the fugitive. He's not the prime minister, Netanyahu. I don't expect the fugitive, Netanyahu, to find himself in the prisoner dock anytime soon. The huge plus of the ICC arrest warrant is, let's not forget that not only does the United States government provide $3, $4, $5 billion a year in money and cash and weapons, but tax-exempt organizations, corporations, private entities, individuals have supported illegal occupation settlements, the provision of weapons. And by the way, Bernie Sanders screaming peace, 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 while he continues to support the F-35, which is slaughtering tens of thousands of Palestinians because there's an economic benefit to Vermonters, says volumes about what this is about. The reality of it is, for decades, people have been able to say, where's your proof? We disagree. We don't accept your description of Israel as committing genocide or war crimes or ethnic cleansing. Well, that has changed now. There has been an arrest warrant issued for genocide, for war crimes, for ethnic cleansing by the ICC against Netanyahu. People, individuals, companies, private are on notice now that if they continue to do business with Netanyahu, that if they continue to provide money for his use, if they continue to enter into arms agreements with them, this is very much potentially a conspiracy after the fact, and they too could be subject to prosecution by the ICC. Now, the fact that I do this in New York City may say, fine, the ICC can't arrest me and Interpol can't come for me while sitting in New York City. But it does mean if there's a red notice and Interpol entered against me, if it does mean under the Rome Statute, if 120 or 30 or 40 states live up to their obligation under the statute, those people in the United States, those people in France, those people in Germany, those people in Canada, individuals, CEOs, heads of states, members of organizations that are providing money are on notice. Should they leave the safety of the blind state within which they find comfort, they can be arrested. They can be charged themselves. That's where it becomes a big issue. I also believe that under the ICC rules, there can be efforts made to freeze assets, to limit discussions, to place a figurative stranglehold around this completely out of control Netanyahu and Israel. Now, how long will it take? I don't know. And I've said for years that I think the international criminal justice system needs to be revisited. The ICC historically has targeted people of color. The ICC historically has targeted Muslims. The ICC historically has targeted indigenous people. This time they broke. It took them, 6, 8, 10 months to do what they did in 15 days against Putin? But I think we need to revisit. The other great concern that I have is this naivete, this notion that the United Nations somehow exercises the type of political, moral, and principled position on the world community that it can rein in these types of war criminals. It cannot. We know the ICJ certainly issued legitimate grounds for a tribunal to continue against Israel. It's not happening. The notion that a Security Council with 5 original founders that control the United Nations can continue to veto legislation says it's time to revisit it. Now, we're entering a new period in the world. We have these multinational relationships. We have arms manufacturers arming each other all over the world. We cannot continue to expect accountability. We cannot continue to expect the application of equality in international law under the old rules. What may have worked in 45, 46, 48, 50, or even 60 is not working now. It's time for the world community, particularly the global South, particularly those communities that are unwilling to accept what Israel and the United States are doing, to come together and to push the envelope to come up with a new structure going forward. If not, we will have Israel going on and on. We will have the United States going on and on.
On January 20th, Trump will be sworn again as president of the United States. Will this have any changes on policy towards Israel, towards the war in Gaza? I mean, he talks about he doesn't like wars and he doesn't like to finance when it comes to Ukraine, but you know that he wants to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. What about Israel slaughtering Palestinians or killing Lebanese?
You might better ask that question to the signatories of the Abraham Accord. We all know that Trump could care less about a 2-day-old Palestinian child. We all know that Trump could care less about a 100-year-old Palestinian survival of the onset of the continuing Nakba. We all know that Trump is interested in only one thing: personal power, personal wealth, and that puts him in bed with some of the most sinister players in the world community. The election of Trump, and I am not saying the election of Warren of Harris would have made any difference. That's a different issue for a different discussion. The election of Donald Trump, the president of the United States, is an absolute green light to Netanyahu to do anything and everything he wishes to do against anyone in the region. Meanwhile, the signatories to the Abraham Accords are going to be involved and are going to be complicit, whether it's by active involvement or whether it's by silence, whether it's acquiescence. This is a critical crossroad. We have a president in the making who is filling his cabinet, his inner circle, with war criminals, with billionaires, with predators, with people of the worst moral character, with absolute no principle whatsoever. This is going to be a self-feed for Trump and his administration. And for those who believe that the notion that somehow Trump is going to bring peace, Trump brings, quote unquote, peace to the table when it means money for himself. Trump historically moves to negotiate settlements when it empowers him, when it benefits him. In his mind, Israel benefits him. In his mind, his strongest supporters are Zionists. In his mind, the eradication of Palestinians is not a problem at all.
How tragically ironic is it that the Genocide Convention was brought into being largely through the efforts of a Holocaust survivor who was dedicated to ensuring that mass extermination of a population never occur again, that now Israel is perpetrating the most horrific genocide of the 21st century?
Well, I've long said that the notion that the Nuremberg tribunals, which gave rise to the convention, the Nuremberg tribunals was brought together to hold accountable military, political, and civil leaders of Nazi Germany for genocide perpetrated against Jews. And here we are, 70, 80 years later. The victims have become the victimizers. Here we are, those that looked to the world and said, where are you? Where were you? What did you do to protect the foundation of a world community? Today saying, we are protecting the foundation of a world community. Yes. I went to law school a lifetime ago with the son of one of the chief prosecutors at the Nuremberg Tribunal, who lived to be, he passed a few years ago at over 100 years of age. And his father was sickened by the whole notion. His father took a principled stand, he believed, a Jew, in the prosecution of Nazi war criminals at Nuremberg, only to see later in his life the world's embracing other war criminals that shared his background and experience. Just a nightmare, terrible, horrific. It's interesting because while initially, in the shadow of October 7th, again, which is being manipulated and played and used by Israel and Zionists, you had many Jews in their 80s, 90s, even older, who showed solidarity with rejoinder, with a response. That's gone. Those that still continue to live increasingly, and along with a younger generation of Jews, are looking at what Israel has done every day since and is continuing to do, and what it says it will do in Gaza and the West Bank, who are now sickened to their stomach. Let us not forget that after 2014 in Gaza, some dozens of survivors of the Holocaust took out an ad in the New York Times calling what Israel then did as genocide. If that was genocide, what is this?
Stanley Cohen, thank you again for coming on Arab Talk.
My pleasure. It's always wonderful to be with you. Inshallah, we can move on to some good subjects and good discussions in the coming future. But until then, let us not forget resistance is necessary. Resistance covers many steps from words to struggle, and that covers many actions. I wish everyone who's involved strength, solidarity, principle. Thank you all.
That's the voice in the face of Stanley Cohen discussing the recent Amnesty International newly released 296-page report, basically saying and concluding that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. And you know, Jamal, I mean, Stanley Cohen, we've had him on the show before. He's very compelling. He gives a very detailed analysis. But, you know, it's important to go back to the point that you made earlier. Despite the ICC, the ICJ, Amnesty International, all international human rights and international law groups basically saying that Israel is committing genocide, we don't see any movement from the world community in holding Israel accountable on the ground. Murders are occurring every day. Starvation in Gaza is occurring every day. Children are dying in Gaza every day. So we see this, if you will, this split between what the world community and international bodies are saying with the reality on the ground in Gaza, which hasn't changed.
That's right. Back, to the major story, Jess, as you've mentioned in the intro, Bashar al-Assad's long reign in Syria has ended after 13 years of civil war. Syria's rebel fighters have stormed the capital Damascus and claimed victory. The government forces fled without significant resistance as the fighters poured into the city. We have some unconfirmed reports that Bashar al-Assad is in Russia, but we don't know. But he fled the country, and that's what I've been seeing and reading, that he might have gone to Russia and brought his family there. Now, the existing country's prime minister, who remained in Damascus, was on TV and said that he would work on a transition government and cooperate with the rebels. The rebels called on their forces to stay away from public institutions until they could formally hand it over. Yet, I've actually saw some footage minutes ago of people storming Bashar al-Assad's palace and loading up on silverware and I don't know what they found there. So they're supposed to protect these institutions, so hopefully it doesn't, as you said, basically becomes all chaos out there. So what happened, Jess, what we know is actually this didn't happen in a vacuum, right? So Russia is busy with its war in Ukraine and couldn't provide enough protection to Assad. Hezbollah is busy with Israel trying to survive in Lebanon, so it couldn't protect Assad. And the rebels took advantage of it. They started moving basically into Aleppo first, then Hama, then Homs. They freed a lot of the prisoners who were under the Assad regime. And what I say always is that no regime will fall if that regime had the support of the people and the army. And it looks like Assad lost both, because the army, which is actually better equipped than the rebels, basically collapsed in a few days. And it seems that a lot of the people are happy and celebrating, and many people rush to the prisons to see their freed loved ones, and they've been suffering and agonizing for years. The Syrian pounds is something like 17,000 liras to the dollar. People cannot put food on the table. And yet the small group of the basically Assad family were living lavishly, were people starving. So you're not going to be able to get the support of the people
No, that's exactly right.
And now when he couldn't get his protectors to support him, he took off. It reminds me a little bit of Zain al-Abidin in Tunisia. And he quietly
Right.
boarded up on a plane and went to Saudi Arabia, and we never heard from him until he died. He died basically in Saudi Arabia. That's when they announced, he lived the rest of his life there. But what we know, here's the big question. Will the Assad family rule be replaced with better or worse leaders? That's the big questions. And I want to share with you some information about what I know, okay?
Okay.
So the leader that now who has been present in front of the TV and providing interviews on Al Jazeera and others, his name is Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, okay? And actually, this is his nom de guerre. It's not his real last name, but anyway, we'll go by that. Few years ago, maybe about 7 years or so, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, the U.S. had a $10 million reward on his head because he was with Al-Qaeda in Iraq. In Iraq, he was with Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi. Later on, when all the mayhem started in Syria, he moved into Syria and formed Al-Nusra Front, which is basically, names have changed, whatever, but that's the first kind of one of the many rebels groups. Started as an Al-Qaeda splinter in Syria. Then he started to soften his image and move a little bit from the far right to a little bit to the center. He removed his what we call al-amama, his head cover that he used to kind of like all the fighters of Al-Qaeda wear, and removed that, and now he appears in military fatigues on interviews, and people had supposedly, like, people had forgotten his past, and I wouldn't be surprised in few weeks he'll be donning a suit and a tie. but that's the reality. Just at least, that's why I said the question is it going to be worse or is it going to be better? Because at the end of the day, the Syrian population have been suffering for the past 17 years with a siege and boycotts and infiltrators fighting in the country and so forth, splintering the country. And how is their life going to change? One more thing I want to add. One more thing quickly I want to add. Israel took advantage of this, and within the past few hours, they went from the Golan Heights into Jabal al-Sheikh and 5 other Syrian villages, and now actually they've been announcing to these 5 Syrian villages to the residents there to remain at home and not leave. So now they are occupying what they call a buffer zone. Okay, so they're occupying a buffer zone. So we have these calls. Also, weeks ago, Turkey has been sending messages that saying some of its ministers or whatever that Aleppo belongs to us, and that they had 4 million Syrians living there. They want to send them back into Syria. So I see the knives are, like when they say when the cow falls, the people carrying knives come out of the woodwork to take a piece of it. And that's the sad news about it. And hopefully that does not happen.
Well, Jamal, I think that's a really excellent analysis. And I think it's important for our listeners and our viewers to understand is that we don't know what the future is going to hold. When you say, is it going to be better or is it going to be worse? It's unclear at this moment. What we do know is that the Bashar al-Assad regime has been brutal. You said 17 years, but actually the Assad regime, including his father, it's been about 50 years since the 70s. And even though Syrians are a little uncomfortable and anxious and worried about what the future will bring, there's a general feeling that I'm getting from reading the news, just like you have, that there is relief that the Assad regime has fallen. We don't know what's going to take its place. I will take note of the fact that the Israeli and the Americans have been interestingly non-critical of this. And I would say to the Americans and to the Israelis, Jamal, be careful for what you wish for. They've been pushing for this. We've talked about this on Arab Talk for years and years and years. Syria is the center of a proxy war, between, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries and Iran, Russia, and some of the other proxies, right? So all bets are off now. We don't know what's going to happen. Abu Muhammad Jalani will take over. There are a lot of groups that are behind him. He's going to soften his image. But I think the real story here, Jamal, is how this is going to completely remake what's happening in Palestine, in Lebanon, and in the greater region. Because, as you rightly point out, Russia is busy. They didn't help Assad. Hezbollah, is busy. Obviously, they didn't help Assad. The thing that you didn't mention was that Iran, in the last 36 hours, took back all of its advisors. They saw the writing on the wall, too. So the Iranians, who have been historic supporters of Bashar al-Assad, are out, too. They're busy with their own problems. So this creates a vacuum. This creates instability in the region. I think it's going to create a huge refugee kind of reorganization. Syrians want to go back. I mean, how many millions of Syrians, Jamal, are internally and externally displaced, want to go back? So it's a very interesting time. Trump is coming into office at the same time. So I think we don't know what this is going to lead to. It's kind of interesting. And you've been paying attention to the Israeli and the Arab press, Jamal. I'm kind of curious what the Israeli press has been saying about this and what the Gulf countries have been saying.
Well, they see this as an opportunity. As I've mentioned,
Yeah.
Israel is already on Syrian territory, not to mention also that they control the Golan Heights for many years. But they see an opportunity to create a buffer zone. They see an opportunity with this buffer zone, whether it's going to be, if they're going to keep permanent troops there or not. But that's also a negotiating tactic because, let's say, after the new government forms, that's kind of like a opening point for them to say, well, come talk to us. Maybe you want to join the normalization. Maybe you want to be part of the Abraham Accords, and then we will withdraw from those villages that we have occupied, and then we can normalize, because that's what they're looking to do. And of course now, without Syria, Syria is out of the equation. Egypt has been out of the equation for many years. Jordans have been out of the equation for many years. They're going after Hezbollah, and if Hezbollah is totally neutralized and they're out of the equation, Israel does not have to worry about any neighboring countries. All that they have to do is deal with Hamas in Gaza and the Palestinians, which under Mahmoud Abbas, basically he's the policeman for the West Bank, for parts of the West Bank for that. So that's really the grand scheme that I see. How is it gonna shape up? Just quickly moving on to, because we have a couple of stories here. Why it was very important for us to talk about and have Stanley Cohen talk about the Amnesty International report, because it's a major announcement. And of course, I've said, even though I don't have any faith now in the international community implementing anything that affects Israel, as we can see with the ICC, the warrants that everybody waited for, the warrants to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu and his defense minister, Gallant. Countries started to, backtrack or sidestep, like France, Germany, the UK, saying things like, oh, maybe we shouldn't, maybe the law does not apply to Israel, So there is that Israel exceptionalism. But the thing is here, that's the next story we're going to talk briefly about, is because just during that same period, one of the most highly decorated generals and former Israeli defense minister, Moshe Yaalon, has caused a firestorm by accusing Israel of carrying out ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in northern Gaza. Remember, the United States, whenever you see interviews with spokespeople of the United States, whether at the White House or at the State Department, they deny that there is ethnic cleansing. They deny that there is a genocide. Moshe Yaalon, who served for 3 decades in the Israel Defense Forces, so-called IDF, including the elite Sayeret Matkal Commando Unit, and as the military's chief of staff also said that he believed Israel basically was committing ethnic cleansing in Gaza. He was saying that Israel was losing its identity. I don't know what identity he's talking about.
Yeah, I mean, they found their identity. I don't think
liberal,
they've
he said, liberal democracy and becoming corrupt and leprous fascist Messianic state. This is what he was saying by going into Gaza, annexing, ethnic cleansing it, and he said, look at northern Gaza. And so you don't see that reported that much. I don't know if you saw a lot of reports in Western media.
No, I didn't hear any of this in the American media, Jamal.
But the Israeli media is buzzing about it. Of course, now with what's happening in Syria, there is a distraction. So all eyes are now on Syria. But again, like, how many pieces of evidence do you want to get, even from Israelis themselves, saying that there is ethnic cleansing, that there is a genocide going on there, and the international community is saying, and then, every time I watch a press conference at the White House or at the State Department, I see these spokespeople, and I really pity them, because history is not going to remember them kindly, denying that there is a genocide, denying that there is ethnic cleansing.
No, and there's a stain on the moral integrity, if there can be one, for this administration, for the U.S. government, for the Congress, for the executive branch, for Genocide Joe, for Antony Blinken. They have failed the moral test. They have failed the world community. They hitched their wagon, Jamal, to Benjamin Netanyahu. And when the history is written, and by the way, it's being written now by Stanley Cohen, by Amnesty, by the ICC, by the ICJ, the history is actually being written right now. When you have the former Israeli defense minister also saying that this is ethnic cleansing and apartheid, you think about, well, Antony Blinken has been so quiet lately, Jamal. Genocide Joe has pardoned his son and has given Benjamin Netanyahu kind of a clear path and has not pressed him at all, obviously. So the stain on the United States, the stain on the world community, while this genocide, and Jamal, it's important to note, this genocide, we talk about it sometimes in the past tense. It's active. It's not stopping. Children are starving to death. People are being killed. Palestinians are being killed every single day, Jamal, every single day. And will the world wake up to this? I don't have the confidence that world governments will, but the people have. I want to just remind you of one other thing, and I don't know if you want to comment on this. Donald Trump is threatening Hamas. I don't know if you remember that. That was about a week ago. He basically said, oh, you better, this is his comment to Hamas, you better let the hostages go because you don't want to see me angry. All hell will break loose. What a crazy thing to say, Jamal, in the midst of this genocide. Like, what is he threatening can happen with the devastation that is already happening? So this is a very interesting time. We'll note that 2024 going into 2025 with the fall of Syria, with what's happening in Palestine and globally, will turn out to be a very interesting time historically as we look back on it.
Well, I want to end by quoting Genocide Joe, as you label him. No one is above the law. You know how many times he said that when it came to Trump's trial, when he was asked about what's happening to Donald Trump, and when, every time he'll say, no one is above the law. And I'm adding 3 dots, except, except for my son and Benjamin Netanyahu.
Absolutely, Jamal. It's a great comment that you made. You posted it online. People should read it. People should have that emblazed on a T-shirt. Picture of Joe Biden with a comment, no one is above the law, with a picture of Netanyahu and his son. Joe Biden, Jamal, is going to go into the dustbin of history as one of the most destructive forces on the world stage. He has undermined the rule of law. He has caused and facilitated a genocide in Gaza. The man has caused damage, and his reputation, again, when history books are written, he will go down in history as one of the worst, most evil, if you will, horrible presidents of the modern era. No question.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to listen to the past shows, and we'll talk to you next week.
See you next week.